The six-star room, the six-star hotel, towered over Dubai's glittering skyline like a temple carved from glass and steel. Its spires caught the evening light, casting broken reflections onto the restless waters of the creek. Inside, chandeliers spilled cascades of crystal light across marble floors, so polished they mirrored every hem of every gown, every heel that clicked past. Perfume, amber, rosewood, oud, mingled with the faint sharpness of Bordeaux and the whisper of burning sandalwood. A string quartet played softly in the corner, each note trembling like a silver thread holding the room together. Tonight was not just another dinner. It was a performance staged for the powerful, a gathering where decisions were made that would ripple far beyond the room, affecting stock markets, trade deals, and entire nations. To the guests, this was another evening of indulgence. To the staff, it was survival measured by the weight of trays and the length of smiles. Among them moved Layla Carter, her black apron pressed flat, shoes worn thin from endless shifts, a tray balanced with the precision of someone who had long learned that mistakes were not allowed. She was 25, her hair tied neatly, her features sharpened by the quiet weight of responsibility. Above her left brow lay a faint scar, one she rarely spoke of, but which seemed to glow under certain lights, a permanent reminder of the years when even safety had to be fought for. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from nerves but from the buzzing phone tucked into her apron pocket. A short message, sharp as a blade, still burned in her chest. Insurance denied treatment again. Mom's case closed. The words had dropped into her life like a stone, heavy enough to bruise but not enough to crush, because she did not allow herself to break. Not here, not tonight. As she moved between tables, her ears caught whispers that led like smoke. "Uniforms are slipping," one man muttered. "Look at her shoes. Thrift store." Another voice, sweetened with sarcasm, replied, "At least the hotel's diversity quota is being met." A woman laughed behind her glass of wine, the kind of laughter that was not loud but heavy, meant to be felt in the bones of its target. Layla did what she always did, breathed slowly, remembered her mentor's advice. Words are power. Do not waste them on those who cannot hear. She placed a glass before a senator with hands steadier than she felt, the liquid rippling but not spilling, then stepped back, ready for the next demand. At the head of table 1 sat Omar Al-Farid, the energy billionaire whose wealth flowed like the oil he once traded, his presence slicing the air sharper than the crystal in his hand. His tailored suit gleamed dark as midnight, his smile cutting, polished, predatory. Around him clustered a constellation of influence. Senator Daniel Brooks, tie loosened, eyes glazed with whiskey. Nick Harper, slick-haired media king whose empire ran on scandal. Clara Price, pearls strung like armor, her smile a blade wrapped in silk. Ambassador Lydia Grant, her pin glittering under the lights, always watching. Dr. Thomas Hale, scholar of the Middle East, his gray temples and worn spectacles the mark of a lifetime of study. And at Omar's right hand, Amina Al-Farid, his daughter, just 22, studying international relations abroad, her eyes keen, her silence deliberate, as though she were collecting truths no one else noticed. Layla approached, tray steady. She set a glass before Senator Brooks, ignoring the sting of Clara's remark. So humble, isn't she? If she represents the hotel's standards, they should at least buy her new shoes. Nick chuckled, the kind of laugh meant to draw others into cruelty, and Omar leaned back, watching her with the sharp delight of a man about to toy with prey. His voice, smooth and low, slid into Arabic, silk threaded with thorns. "A lowly creature dares touch my crystal glass." The words carried across the table, followed by a crack of laughter like fireworks exploding in the still air. They assumed the waitress did not understand. They assumed she was invisible. Layla's hand brushed the stem of the crystal glass she had just placed down. She straightened, spine rising like a drawn bowstring. Her trembling stopped. She lifted her gaze, calm, unyielding, and for the first time, the chatter dulled, curious eyes turning. Her lips parted, and in flawless Arabic she answered, her voice low but steady, carrying a weight that silenced the room. "The crystal glass does not lower the one who holds it. It only reflects the dignity of the one who drinks from it." The air fractured. Silence spread in waves. A fork slipped against porcelain, chiming like a bell. Ambassador Grant's whisper reached the edge of the table. "She understands Arabic." Dr. Hale's brows shot upward, his spectacles nearly slipping from his nose. Amina's fingers unclenched from the napkin she had twisted in her lap, her eyes glinting with something sharp, relief or perhaps recognition. Even the security guard at the door shifted his stance, sensing a tremor that could not be named. The laughter that had filled the room seconds before evaporated, leaving behind the heavy echo of arrogance shattered. Omar's smile did not falter at once, but the stillness of his jaw betrayed him, a muscle tightening, just beneath the skin. He tapped his glass, feigning amusement, but the spark had gone out of his eyes. He had meant to reduce her. Instead, her words had risen like a flame that burned the curtain of prejudice. For the first time, the battlefield of the evening had shifted, and the billionaire realized that the rules no longer belonged to him. The language duel, the silence that settled over the banquet hall, was not ordinary silence. It was the kind of pause that comes after thunder, when the world is unsure whether the storm has passed or if another bolt is about to strike. Every guest at the table, from the senator with whiskey-warmed eyes to the diplomat with her polished pin, felt the shift. They had come expecting wine, laughter, and the comfortable assurance of their own superiority. What they received was the unsettling sound of a waitress, someone they had decided was beneath their notice, speaking with authority in a language older than their fortunes and deeper than their arrogance. Omar Al-Farid leaned back in his chair, his hand resting lightly on the stem of his crystal glass. To anyone else, his smile looked unshaken, but his daughter Amina knew that particular curve of his lips. It was the mask he wore when he felt cornered. The billionaire's pride was a fortress built on dominance, and tonight a single sentence had cracked its gate. He could not allow that. He would not allow that. His fortune, his reputation, his very name rested on the illusion that he controlled every room he walked into. To yield an inch, even to a waitress, was unthinkable. Clara Price, pearls glinting like the teeth of a predator, broke the silence first. "Tourist phrases," she said sweetly, her voice dripping with dismissal. "Parrot mimicry. Anyone can learn a few lines." She sipped her wine as if the matter were settled, and a few others nodded quickly, desperate to retreat to the comfort of mockery. Yet the words sounded thin, defensive. The foundation of their easy superiority had cracked, and they knew it. Senator Brooks, always too loud and too careless, grunted, "If she's that good, prove it." His voice slurred slightly, but the challenge landed with weight. Evelyn Ward, wrapped in a gown of canary yellow that caught the chandelier light, tapped her fork against her glass. Ting, ting. The sound was sharp, expectant. "Yes," she chimed, "let's have some fun. If she's more than a parrot, let her show us." Laughter trickled back, but it was not the same. It was nervous, watchful, the laughter of jackals uncertain whether the lioness before them had claws. All eyes turned toward Layla. She did not shrink. She did not fumble. Instead, she placed her tray on the side table with deliberate grace, straightened the linen cloth as if arranging a stage, and turned toward them with calm eyes. "If you want to listen," she said softly, still in Arabic, "then I will let the words speak for themselves." The cadence of her voice drew the air taut. Dr. Hale, the scholar, leaned forward, curiosity burning through the years of academia etched into his lined face. Ambassador Grant set her pen down, her diplomatic mask slipping into genuine interest. And Amina, Omar's daughter, clasped her hands together in her lap, heart pounding. For years she had watched her father wield language like a sword, cutting down anyone who dared oppose him. Tonight, for the first time, she wondered if she was about to see him disarmed. Layla closed her eyes briefly, as though gathering the river of memory that lived inside her. When she opened them again, her gaze was steady, her posture tall. She began to recite, not in broken lines or memorized fragments, but with the rhythm of someone who had lived inside the language, someone who had allowed it to carve itself into her bones. Her voice carried the verses of Al-Mutanabi, the great Arab poet, words flowing like water over stone, each consonant precise, each vowel stretched to its rightful length. The pauses fell naturally, like footsteps on familiar ground. The effect was immediate. The clinking of silverware and the low hum of background conversation from other tables seemed to vanish. Even the quartet in the corner faltered, bows hesitating against strings as though the instruments themselves had stopped to listen. The poetry rolled out into the room, lifting and then deepening, painting imagery of courage, of human dignity, of the unyielding spirit that refused to be silenced. Dr. Hale's fork slipped from his hand, landing with a muted clatter on the tablecloth. His mouth parted, and for a man who had lectured across universities and written volumes on Arabic literature, the words came out almost in a whisper. Extraordinary. He adjusted his spectacles as if they could sharpen what he was hearing, then murmured again, "This is not mimicry. This is lived fluency. This is mastery." The guests exchanged glances. Some fidgeted in their seats, uncomfortable with the sudden shift in hierarchy. Others leaned forward, compelled despite themselves. Omar, however, tapped his finger against his glass with slow precision, his smile thinning. "Poetry is easy," he said in English, loud enough for all to hear. "Eloquence does not equal understanding." He tilted his head toward Nick Harper, the media mogul, his signal clear. Nick nodded, slick hair gleaming under the light, and switched into Arabic with the smoothness of someone who had practiced but rarely been challenged. His words came fast, deliberate, layered with jargon, shipping lanes through the strait, tariff disputes among 3 trade blocs, currency spreads, figures tangled like vines. It was a trap disguised as sophistication, the kind of question designed to drown a listener in complexity, to reveal whether their fluency was shallow or profound. "This will trip he." "Her up," Senator Brooks muttered, settling back with a smug grin. Clara's lips curved into a sharp smile, the look of a woman who believed she had already seen the end of the performance. Layla did not rush. She listened. She tilted her head slightly, eyes narrowing as if sketching an invisible map across the tablecloth. Then, when the room had grown heavy with anticipation, she began to answer. Still in Arabic, her tone calm but sure, she broke the labyrinth into 3 clear routes: the Gulf to Red Sea corridor, the Mediterranean via transshipment hubs, and the South Asia detour with rising risks. She outlined the insurance variables, the elasticity of demand under price shocks, the cascading second-order effects on downstream logistics. Her words were not decoration, they were architecture. Each idea was laid with care, stacked upon the next, until what she had built was no longer an answer, but a fortress. By the time she concluded, the muttering at the table had evaporated. Ambassador Grant leaned back, her expression no longer curious but respectful, the pin on her chest catching the chandelier's glow. Dr. Hale nodded along with each segment, his face alight as if grading the rarest, most brilliant exam of his career. Even Senator Brooks, flushed from drink, was forced into a slow clap, deliberate, unwilling, but undeniable. "That," he said, his voice stripped of mockery, "is not just fluency, that is expertise." The applause spread cautiously, though not all joined. Clara pressed her lips together, setting down her glass as if declaring she had seen enough. Nick checked his watch with feigned disinterest, but his shoulders had stiffened. Omar alone sat unmoved, his glass untouched, his smile sharpened back into a blade. He would not surrender to her brilliance. Not yet. He leaned forward, his voice low but audible across the table. "Impressive," he said in Arabic. "But tell me, who are you to wield such words? What proof do you have that you are more than a server playing at scholarship?" The challenge struck like a drumbeat. The guests looked to Layla, waiting. She met Omar's gaze without flinching. Her hand brushed against the fabric of her apron, where the worn edge of an envelope pressed against her palm. Proof. She carried it always, not because she needed validation, but because the world so often demanded it. She let her fingers rest there, steady, but she did not draw it yet. Instead, she said quietly, her voice cutting the silence, "I was a student of Professor Yusuf al-Hassan." The name fell into the room like a stone into still water, ripples spreading instantly. Dr. Hale's chair scraped against the marble as he half rose, eyes wide. "Al-Hassan," he repeated, That man is one of the foremost linguists alive. He does not take ordinary students. He only takes the best. His gaze shifted to Layla, awe dawning where curiosity had been. A gasp fluttered through the table. Amina's lips parted, her breath caught. For the first time, Omar's mask of composure cracked, not shattered, not yet, but fractured enough for his daughter to see the tremor. The room had shifted again, and this time it was no longer about whether Layla could speak Arabic. It was about who she truly was, and what else she carried in silence, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. The past revealed. The name of Professor Yusuf al-Hassan lingered in the air like a bell still ringing long after the strike. It echoed through the marble hall, carried in whispers between the guests, weighed against the glitter of chandeliers and the scent of spiced wine. For those who knew the man's reputation, it was not simply a name. It was a seal of legitimacy, an undeniable marker of brilliance. The professor was a legend in the field of linguistics, a scholar whose lectures were treasures and whose mentorship was reserved only for those rare few who combined raw talent with relentless discipline. To have studied under him was not a detail to be brushed aside. It was a revelation that reshaped the way every eye in the room now regarded the young waitress before them. Dr. Hale, the gray-templed scholar, had risen halfway from his chair when she spoke. His face glowed with astonishment, as if he were staring at a manuscript he never thought he would hold. Al-Hassan does not teach lightly, he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. He selects one, perhaps two students a year. If this young woman stood among them, then she is no mimic, no fraud. His gaze lingered on Layla, searching her face for traces of the truth he already sensed. Omar al-Farid's expression, by contrast, hardened. His eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched just slightly, and though his lips still shaped a smile, it was brittle, forced, and sharp as glass. For years he had ruled rooms by the sheer weight of his name, his money, his cultivated intimidation. But tonight the balance had tilted. A waitress, someone he had dismissed without thought, was suddenly threatening to eclipse him, not with wealth or influence, but with something more dangerous: respect. Layla did not bask in the attention. She did not gloat or preen. Instead, she stood with the quiet steadiness of someone accustomed to being doubted, accustomed to being measured by the cheapest scale. Her hand brushed the edge of her apron where the envelope pressed against her palm. Its corners were frayed from years of handling, its seal faded but intact. Inside were letters of recommendation, pages written in the professor's hand, testimonials to her skill and promise. It was proof, a weapon she rarely allowed herself to wield, because in her heart she believed her worth was not for others to validate. But tonight was different. Tonight, the room demanded she stand fully revealed. For the briefest of moments, as she weighed whether to draw the envelope, her thoughts drifted backward, carried by memory to a cramped apartment thousands of miles away. She was 10 years old, sitting cross-legged on the tin carpet of her living room while her mother juggled bills at the kitchen table. The hum of a broken fridge filled the silence, and the light flickered each time the neighbors upstairs turned on their heater. Her mother's face was tired, the kind of tired that lived not just in the body, but in the bones. Yet when Layla had asked about the strange markings in her second-hand book, the looping, flowing script that looked nothing like English, her mother had smiled, a real smile that broke through the exhaustion. "That," she said, "is Arabic, a language as old as deserts, as deep as rivers. If you want, I can find you tapes at the library." And so, her journey began, not with private tutors or expensive schools, but with cassette tapes borrowed from public shelves, with sticky notes scrawled by hand, with hours spent repeating words into the quiet night. Her mother worked double shifts, but she always made time to sit with her, to quiz her on verbs, to laugh gently when her accent twisted the sounds. By the time Layla was 16, her talent was unmistakable. She won competitions, earned scholarships, even caught the attention of Professor Al-Hassan during a cultural exchange program. He had been the one to sharpen her rough brilliance, to teach her that words carried not only meaning but power, That language was a map of civilizations, and that to master it was to step into the mind of history itself. But just as her life was opening, it closed. Her mother's health faltered. Medical bills rose like waves that never stopped breaking. Insurance loopholes shredded the safety net she had believed in. One semester, she could pay tuition. The next, she was forced to leave, her scholarship unable to cover the full burden, her nights consumed by waitressing and caring for her mother instead of lectures and research. The professor had begged her to continue, had written letters of recommendation that could have secured her a future anywhere in the world. Yet she had folded them carefully into an envelope, tucked it into her apron, and stepped into the working world where she could earn immediate money instead of chasing dreams. The banquet hall faded back into view. Layla's gaze returned to Omar, who still watched her with the gleam of a man unwilling to concede. His words were laced with poison. "So you claim the professor's name, but names can be borrowed, lies can be polished. Where is your proof, girl?" The demand was not just his. It was the silent demand of a room trained to believe only what could be stamped, signed, and sealed by authority. Without proof, she would remain just a server who had learned a trick. With it, she would become something more. Her fingers lingered on the envelope again, feeling the worn paper that had traveled with her through years of shifts, years of nights spent choosing between paying rent or medicine. She could draw it now, hold it high, and silence them all. But she hesitated because she knew something deeper. True dignity did not come from what others recognized. It came from what one already knew to be true. So she did not reach for the envelope. Not yet. Instead, she straightened her back, lifted her chin, and spoke again in Arabic, her voice ringing with clarity. "I carry proof, yes, but I do not need to open paper for truth to stand. You see me. You hear me. You cannot deny what you witness with your own ears. Whether or not I unfold this envelope, I remain what I am, a student of knowledge, a servant to words, and a woman whose dignity does not bow to wealth." The hall quivered with the weight of her defiance. Amina's eyes glistened, not just with admiration, but with something more, relief, perhaps even gratitude, that someone at last dared to speak what she herself had always wanted to say. Ambassador Grant's lips curved into the faintest of approving smiles. Dr. Hale pressed a hand against his chest, as if steadying his heart after hearing something rare and precious. But Omar? Omar's face darkened, the smile gone entirely. His power, his control, his very identity had been challenged in front of his peers. And for men like him, humiliation was a wound that demanded an answer. His fingers tightened around his glass. His next words, everyone knew, would not be polite. The shift of power. For a moment, the hall seemed to exist in suspension. The chandeliers glowed above like frozen waterfalls of light. The music from the quartet faltered into silence, and every guest at table 1 held their breath, waiting to see how Omar Al-Farid would respond. Billionaires like him were not accustomed to being challenged, especially not by someone wearing an apron instead of a silk gown, by someone carrying a tray instead of a title. Yet here she stood, steady, unflinching, speaking truths that money could not bend. Omar's hand tightened around the stem of his glass. His knuckles whitened, the veins in his hand faintly rising against his skin. He forced a chuckle, but it rang hollow, echoing not as confidence, but as desperation. "Fine words," he said in Arabic, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet that forced everyone at the table to lean in. "But words alone are wind. They vanish once spoken. What remains? Proof. Where is it? You cannot expect this room of scholars, diplomats, leaders, to believe you without evidence." The words rang out, sharp, accusatory, desperate. Yet even as they filled the air, their power faltered. The more he raged, the smaller he seemed, the less formidable his shadow became. His accusations revealed not strength but fear, not control, but the unraveling of it. Layla did not flinch, she did not argue. She stood calmly, tray at her side, and allowed the silence after his outburst to stretch. It was a silence that condemned him far more than her words could. Finally she spoke, her tone quiet but cutting as a blade drawn across silk. No one needed to orchestrate anything. You wrote the script yourself when you mocked me. All I did was answer." Gasps spread through the room. Amina closed her eyes briefly, relief washing across her face, as though Layla had spoken aloud the truth she herself had carried for years, but never dared to voice. The billionaire's empire of intimidation trembled. What had begun as a private insult had become a public reversal. The hierarchy of the evening, the billionaire above, the waitress below, had been upended before their very eyes. And though Omar had wealth, though he had power, though he had commanded the fear of many, tonight he could not control the one thing that mattered most, the respect of the room. The security guard at the entrance shifted forward slightly, watching Omar with wary eyes, as though sensing the dangerous energy of a man who might lash out in desperation. Maya, Layla's co-worker, paused mid-step with her tray of bread rolls, her eyes wide, silently cheering from the edges of the hall. It was Amina, however, who broke the silence this time. Her voice was soft, but it carried weight because it came from the one person Omar could not ignore. "She is right," she said, her eyes locked on her father. "You mock, you belittle, and you call it strength. But tonight, strength was hers. You only proved your weakness." "Sir." The words struck harder than anything Layla could have spoken. A hush fell again, heavy and thick, as Omar's gaze snapped toward his daughter. For a long moment, father and daughter stared at one another, the air between them charged with the unspoken truth that something fundamental had shifted, not just in the room, but in their relationship. The triumph of dignity. For a long moment, after Amina's quiet defiance, the hall seemed suspended in a silence so heavy that even the crystals of the chandeliers seemed to shiver under its weight. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, caught between their loyalty to wealth and their respect for truth. It was rare, almost unthinkable, for anyone to contradict Omar al-Farid in public, and yet it had just happened. Not from an enemy, not from a rival, but from his own daughter. The sharp crack of power breaking could almost be heard beneath the hum of the air conditioning. Omar's face darkened. For decades he had cultivated the image of a man who could not be touched, a man whose voice was law, whose presence silenced rooms. Yet here, in the glittering center of his influence, his armor had been pierced by the one weapon he never accounted for: dignity, wielded with calm precision by a woman he thought invisible. He rose abruptly from his chair, the force of his movement sending his napkin sliding to the floor. His glass trembled but did not spill, catching the chandelier's reflection like a shard of broken pride. "This ends here," he spat in English, his voice cutting through the hall like a lash. "This is my table, my city, my night. I will not be made a spectacle by a servant." He threw the word servant with venom, as if it were enough to reduce her back to silence. But the room no longer moved to his rhythm. The applause that had once been his currency, the laughter that had once shielded his arrogance, those had evaporated. All that remained was a thin thread of authority unraveling in his clenched hands. Layla did not step back. She did not lower her gaze. She stood with the steadiness of someone who had carried burdens far heavier than insults. "You called me servant," she said quietly, her voice level but strong, "and you are right. Tonight I served wine. Tomorrow I will serve my mother by standing at her bedside. And always I will serve truth. There is no shame in service. The shame is in believing that wealth gives you the right to strip dignity from those who serve." The word struck harder than any shouted accusation could have. Guests stirred, their faces shifting, some with guilt, some with admiration, some with the dawning realization that they were witnessing the collapse of a giant, not from outside attack, but from within. Ambassador Grant's lips curved in the faintest of smiles. Dr. Hale exhaled slowly, shaking his head in wonder, as if unable to believe that a night he had expected to be just another banquet had transformed into a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. Omar's chair screeched against the marble as he shoved it back. His eyes flicked to his daughter, who met his gaze unflinchingly. For the first time, she did not bow her head. For the first time, she did not shrink beneath his shadow. "Enough," he growled, his voice low, shaking with rage. But Amina's voice, though soft, overrode his. "No, Father. Enough is what she gave us tonight. Enough truth. Enough courage. Enough to strip the illusions we have lived in. You can storm out, but it will not erase what was spoken." The words left him no ground. His lips parted, but no retort came. He looked around the table, searching for allies, but found only silence or averted gazes. Even those who had laughed with him earlier now avoided his eyes, unwilling to tether themselves to a sinking ship. Pride would not let him remain, and so he did what wounded men of power always do. He left. He turned sharply, his footsteps echoing across the marble, and strode from the hall with the rigid gait of a man who could not admit he was fleeing. The double doors slammed shut behind him, the sound reverberating like the end of a rain. The room exhaled. The oppressive weight of his presence lifted, leaving behind a hush that felt cleaner, freer, as though the very air had shifted. Slowly the applause returned, not cautious, not polite, but rising with genuine force. Guests stood, clapping with the recognition that they had witnessed something rare, the humbling of arrogance, the triumph of dignity. Layla bowed her head slightly, acknowledging them, but she did not bask in it. This was not about their approval. It had never been. It was about reclaiming her own voice, her own place in a world that so often tried to erase it. She reached for the envelope still lying on the table, folded it once more, and slipped it back into her apron. Proof had done its work, but it would not define her. What defined her was already written in her actions, her words, her unbroken stance. Ambassador Grant rose from her seat and approached. Her voice carried the weight of diplomacy, but also genuine respect. "Miss Carter," she said softly, "if you ever tire of serving wine, I would be honored to recommend you for work in translation and diplomacy. A voice like yours belongs where it can shape nations, not just evenings." Layla met her gaze and smiled faintly. "Thank you, Ambassador," she said. "For tonight, I am content to serve where I am needed most." Her hand brushed the envelope in her apron, not for the professor's seal this time, but for the message on her phone, the denial of treatment that had cut her so deeply hours earlier. She carried that weight still, heavier than applause, heavier than opportunity. Later, when the hall had emptied, when the music had faded, and when even the chandeliers seemed to dim with the quiet of the night, she slipped out into the city air. Dubai glittered around her, the skyscrapers like blades of glass against the desert sky. She pulled her phone from her pocket, the same message still glowing on the screen. Her thumb hovered, aching to call her mother, to tell her everything that had happened. But before she could, the phone buzzed again. A new message appeared. Hospital account settled in full, treatment approved, immediate transfer scheduled. The words blurred before her eyes, her breath catching in her throat. She read them twice, 3 times, unable to believe. Then another notification followed. Anonymous sponsor. Layla's knees weakened, and she leaned against the cool stone of the hotel wall, tears burning hot trails down her cheeks. She knew in her heart that it had not been Omar. His pride would never allow it. No, this had been Amina. Quiet, watchful Amina, who had seen and heard and chosen in her own way to break free. A daughter's rebellion had become a woman's salvation. The city lights shimmered, distorted by her tears. She pressed a hand to her chest, not in disbelief but in gratitude, whispering the words that had carried her through the storm. The crystal glass does not lower the one who holds it. It only reflects the dignity of the one who drinks from it. Tonight, she had not only spoken those words, she had lived them. And somewhere in the quiet night beyond the glittering towers, Omar Al-Farid sat in his fortress of glass and steel, staring into a crystal glass that suddenly reflected nothing but the emptiness of a man who had been defeated not by wealth, not by power, but by truth.